Europe was no longer a continent. It had become a graveyard. Cities that once shone with life now stood silent. Broken walls, burned earth, and death everywhere.
World War I did not just destroy nations, it destroyed human lives. More than 20 million were dead. Over 21 million were wounded. Every body was a story. Every wound, a lifetime of pain.
The young men who left their homes never truly returned, and those who did were no longer the same. This was the lost generation, youth buried in the trenches of Europe. Bullets did not only tear through flesh, they shattered the human mind. Soldiers lived with nightmares, fear, screams, and memories that never faded. After the war, factories shut down, businesses collapsed, national treasuries were empty. Europe was economically broken, and no country suffered more than Germany.
People was starving. People stood in endless ration lines. Children were weak. Parents were helpless. This was not just defeat, it was national humiliation. Money lost all meaning. Banknotes were burned for warmth. Buying a loaf of bread felt like winning a battle. Economic collapse was feeding anger and despair.
The government was fragile. The streets were violent. Communists, nationalists, rebels, each fought their own war. Germany was no longer a nation. It had become a battlefield.
The strangest truth was this: the German army still stood. Berlin had never been invaded, and yet Germany surrendered. For civilians, this made no sense. One question echoed across Germany. If we lost, why did the enemy never march into our cities? That confusion gave birth to something dangerous.
A belief spread across Germany that the war was not lost on the battlefield, but betrayed from within. Politicians, Jews, and communists were labeled traitors. This lie became a weapon.
The anger remained. The shame burned. The sense of betrayal survived. World War I had ended, but the fire of revenge was alive. And in that fire, the next war was born.
November 1918. The guns fell silent, but silence did not mean peace. Across Europe, soldiers returned home, carrying wounds visible and invisible alike. Britain, France, and the United States celebrated victory. Parades filled the streets, flags waved, speeches echoed, and nations exhaled relief. But the cost of victory was beyond comprehension.
Meanwhile, the defeated nations faced humiliation and despair. Empires crumbled, borders redrawn, and ordinary citizens felt the weight of decisions made far from their homes.
Borders that had stood for centuries were erased in a stroke of a pen. New nations were born: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. Old powers faded, and instability spread like wildfire.
Germany was left stunned. Not only had it lost the war, but its people felt dishonored. Cities were intact, armies still standing, yet the nation had surrendered. Austria-Hungary, once mighty, shattered. Ethnic groups demanded independence. Vienna, Budapest, Prague, all witnessing the death of empires and birth of uncertainty. The Ottoman Empire fell into pieces. Turkey would survive, but Arab lands were divided under foreign mandates. The old world order was gone, and a new, unstable order was taking shape. France had won, but victory came at a price. Villages were destroyed, fields turned to mud. Victory was bittersweet. The land bore the scars of endless battle. Britain emerged victorious, proud yet weary. The nation had sacrificed so much, yet the people longed for peace. Victory felt hollow when measured against the toll. The United States entered late, but its impact was decisive. Americans returned with hope, believing they had helped bring a war to end all wars. Little did they know, history had other plans. Ordinary people, workers, women, children, faced hunger, loss, and uncertainty. The war had destroyed lives far beyond battlefield. Anger and frustration simmered silently. Victory for some, defeat for others. Pride for some, humiliation for many. The lines between right and wrong blurred. And in this fragile moment, the first seeds of future conflict were quietly sown. The world's most powerful leaders gathered in Paris. Woodrow Wilson, David Lloyd George, Georges Clemenceau. Men who had shaped the war now sought to shape peace. But what kind of peace would it be? Paris, the city of light, became a city of power. Grand halls, flashing cameras, and bustling crowds witnessed history in motion. The world watched as treaties were written, but the citizens of Europe were largely forgotten. Every decision mattered. Borders, reparations, colonies, and armies, every stroke of the pen could ignite a new war. Yet these decisions were made behind closed doors, far from the people who would bear the consequences. 4 leaders dominated the conference: Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Georges Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Britain, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Each had a vision of peace, and each vision was deeply conflicting. Wilson came with ideals. He dreamed of a just peace, guided by his 14 points: self-determination, fairness, democracy. Yet idealism often collides with reality. France had suffered the most. Clemenceau demanded revenge. He wanted Germany weakened forever. Security, reparations, humiliation. Clemenceau's France would not forgive easily. Britain sought balance. It wanted Germany punished, but not destroyed. Lloyd George understood that a crippled Germany could destabilize all of Europe.
Italy demanded territory promised in secret treaties, but its claims conflicted with other nations. Ambition met reality, and compromise would prove elusive. Germany, Austria, Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire were not allowed to shape their fate. They were spectators in their own destiny. Humiliation and resentment took root in the hearts of the defeated.
Hours turned into days, days into weeks. Every clause sparked heated debate. Old grudges resurfaced, and compromise often meant leaving someone unhappy. Much of the conference was secretive. Decisions were made without public scrutiny. The people, the soldiers, the families, all left in the dark about the world being reshaped around them. By the spring of 1919, a single document began to take shape. A document that promised peace, but carried within it the seeds of anger, revenge, and resentment. This was the Treaty of Versailles, and it would change history forever. In the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, a treaty was signed. Germany bowed its head. The Allies watched triumphantly, and history was reshaped in ink and paper. The infamous war guilt clause blamed Germany entirely for the war. This single sentence humiliated a nation. Germany was now officially guilty, its honor stripped and its people enraged. Germany was ordered to pay reparations, billions in gold and resources. The burden was immense, straining an already shattered economy and planting the seeds of future anger. The German army was drastically reduced. No tanks, no submarines, minimal artillery. The once mighty army was now a shadow of itself, left defenseless on paper, but resentful in spirit. Germany lost territories at home and abroad. Alsace-Lorraine returned to France. Polish corridor created. Colonies were taken by the Allies. Borders were redrawn, leaving bitterness across generations. The Rhineland was occupied by Allied forces. Germany could not militarize this region. This was a constant reminder of defeat, breeding resentment and a sense of humiliation. Germany's naval fleet was scuttled or seized. Air forces were forbidden. Every symbol of military pride was stripped away, deepening national humiliation.
Germany's colonies in Africa and the Pacific were given to the Allies as mandates. The empire that had once aspired to global influence was now reduced to its European core. The treaty created the League of Nations, a symbol of peace and hope, but Germany was initially excluded. Justice and equality were promised, yet the victors wrote the rules themselves. Beyond reparations, Germany was forced to give coal, steel, and ships. Its economy was drained, its industries crippled. This was punishment masquerading as peace. From bans on conscription to limits on weapon production, from disarmament in occupied zones to forced political reforms, Germany's sovereignty was restricted at every level. Every clause reinforced the nation's humiliation. The Treaty of Versailles was not merely a peace document, it was a tool of punishment, crafted by the victors to humiliate and control. And in its clauses lay the anger, shame, and injustice that would one day fuel a new war, a war far larger than the one it ended. Germany read the Treaty of Versailles and went silent. Shock, disbelief, and anger swept the nation. A proud country had been humiliated on paper, and its people could hardly understand why.
Germany is responsible for the war. This sentence alone felt like a knife to the nation's heart. Many Germans refused to accept it, claiming their army had fought honorably. Territories were stripped away. Alsace-Lorraine returned to France. Polish lands were carved out. The map Germany had known for generations was being erased. Reparations were crippling. Factories, coal mines, and resources were handed to the Allies. Germany, already weakened, now faced economic humiliation on an unprecedented scale. The German army was reduced to 100,000 men. Tanks, submarines, and airplanes were banned. The proud military that had once struck fear across Europe was now impotent by law. Germany's sense of pride was broken. A country that had once been a great power was now forced to bow to the victors. Every citizen felt the weight of disgrace. Humiliation was not just political. It seeped into homes, schools, and hearts. People felt defeated before they had even fought. This psychological anguish would shape the nation for decades.
Many Germans refused to blame the military. Instead, they believed the nation had been betrayed from within. Politicians, Jews, and socialists were labeled traitors. The stab-in-the-back myth was born. Anger grew in every city and town. Resentment became a national emotion. Germany was humiliated, not just in maps and laws, but in the eyes of the world. The shame was not limited to one generation. It passed to children who grew up knowing their country had been beaten, humiliated, and disrespected. The humiliation fed political chaos. The Weimar Republic, already fragile, struggled to maintain authority. Every compromise, every law, was a reminder of defeat. Humiliation bred anger, and anger bred extremism. From this deep wound, new leaders would rise. Leaders who promised to restore Germany's pride and avenge the injustices of Versailles. Germany learned the true cost of defeat. Reparations were astronomical, billions of gold marks demanded by the Allies. It was more than a bill, it was a sentence. Germany's factories and resources were seized to pay reparations. Coal, steel, and machinery, the backbone of the economy, were handed over to foreign powers. The German mark began to lose value. Prices skyrocketed. Money that once bought bread was now worth nothing. Families scrambled to survive. Hunger became a daily reality. Children went to bed hungry.
Parents searched for work that barely existed. Survival became the only priority. Factories closed. Industry ground to a halt. Germany's economy, already fragile, was now collapsing under the weight of debt and demands.
Millions lost their jobs. Skilled workers, soldiers returning from war, all faced unemployment. Frustration and despair became widespread. The mark lost all meaning. Hyperinflation turned wages into jokes. A loaf of bread could cost millions. The economy was not just failing, it was unraveling in real time. Economic collapse fed political unrest. The Weimar Republic struggled to maintain order. Every protest, every strike, reflected the frustration of millions who blamed both their leaders and the victors. Social divisions deepened. Rich versus poor, workers versus elites. Anger simmered across all classes. Desperation fueled conflict on the streets. The Allies closely monitored Germany. Every step to recover economically was restricted or taxed. Germany's sovereignty was limited, even in its own recovery. The economic disaster was not only financial, it was psychological. Shame, frustration, and fear permeated every household. The nation's spirit was crushed along with its economy. Poverty and humiliation created fertile ground. Anger became a political weapon. From the ruins of Germany's economy, extremist movements would rise, promising revenge, pride, and a return to power. In the midst of defeat and humiliation, a fragile democracy was born, the Weimar Republic. Germany hoped for stability, but the foundation was already shaky. Germany was politically fractured. Communists, social democrats, monarchists, and nationalists all vied for power. No single group could unite the nation, and chaos reigned in the streets.
Extremist groups gained momentum. The Freikorps and other paramilitaries filled the void of order. They promised revenge, justice, and strength, appealing to a desperate population.
Political violence became routine. Assassinations of leaders and activists shook the nation. Fear and insecurity spread from every city to every village. The Weimar government struggled to govern. Coalitions collapsed, laws were ignored, and every decision seemed too little, too late. Authority was fragile, and trust even more so. The Treaty of Versailles continued to haunt the Republic. Every law, every compromise was seen as submission to the victors. Public resentment toward the government was growing uncontrollably. Economic collapse fed political extremism. Unemployment, inflation, and reparations made moderates appear weak. Radicals promised solutions that seemed impossible but enticing. In Berlin and other cities, communists attempted revolutions. The Spartacist uprising was crushed, but the fear of revolution lingered, dividing citizens further. In Berlin and other cities, nationalists seized on humiliation. They painted the Republic as weak and unpatriotic. Their message was simple: restore Germany's honor, or watch it disappear. Moderate voices were drowned out. Left and right fought relentlessly, leaving the center powerless. Decision-making stalled, and the nation's future hung by a thread. Every economic crisis, every political scandal sparked riots. Citizens felt betrayed by both the government and the world. Trust in institutions evaporated. The Weimar Republic survived, but barely. Fragile, unstable, and hated by many, it struggled to maintain order while Germany simmered with anger and humiliation. The stage was set for radical leaders to rise from the ashes of chaos. Germany, broken, humiliated, and starving, was fertile ground for a new kind of leader. Despair and anger filled every street, waiting for someone to turn frustration into action. Adolf Hitler, a struggling young man in Vienna, was shaped by war, nationalism, and racial ideology.
He absorbed the anti-Semitic and nationalistic ideas that would later define his movement.
Hitler fought in World War I, wounded, decorated, and embittered. The defeat haunted him. The humiliation of Versailles became personal.
In 1919, Hitler joined a small political group, the German Workers' Party. He quickly became a powerful speaker, captivating audiences with fiery rhetoric and promises of restoration.
Hitler mastered propaganda. He turned resentment into anger, anger into action, and action into votes. Every speech was designed to ignite emotion, not reason.
Hitler attempted to seize power in Munich. The beer hall putsch failed. He was arrested, but the movement survived. Failure became a lesson, not a defeat. In prison, Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. He outlined his vision for Germany: racial purity, revenge for Versailles, and expansion. The book became the blueprint for future tyranny. The Great Depression hit Germany hard. Hitler exploited despair, blaming Jews, communists, and the Treaty of Versailles for every hardship. People, desperate for hope, listened. The Nazi Party grew rapidly. What began as a fringe movement turned into a mass political force. Millions believed Hitler could restore Germany's pride and power. Through elections and propaganda, Hitler gained seats in the Reichstag. The democratic process, ironically, brought a dictator closer to absolute power. Hitler exploited fear and division. He presented himself as the savior against communists, socialists, and the perceived internal enemies. Every crisis became an opportunity. Adolf Hitler became chancellor. The man who had risen from the ashes of Versailles was now in control of a nation, ready to follow him into darkness and war. The Treaty of Versailles was meant to secure peace. Instead, it punished Germany harshly. Humiliation, debt, and disarmament left a wounded nation seething with anger. Shame became a national emotion. A generation grew up believing Germany had been betrayed. This collective trauma would shape political choices for decades to come. Reparations and economic restrictions crippled Germany. Poverty and unemployment created desperation, fertile ground for radical promises. The Republic struggled to govern. Every crisis amplified divisions between left and right. Extremist movements gained credibility by exploiting public dissatisfaction. Radical parties promised revenge and revival. The Nazis, in particular, used Versailles as propaganda, turning national humiliation into political power. Nationalists claimed Germany's honor had been stolen. They painted the treaty as injustice, the Allies as oppressors, and every compromise as betrayal.
Society fractured under economic and political strain. Rich and poor, urban and rural, workers and elites all blamed someone else, and unity became impossible.
The treaty reinforced the stab-in-the-back myth. Citizens were told Germany hadn't lost the war militarily, but was betrayed by internal enemies. This lie fueled resentment, anger, and extremism. Hitler exploited Versailles masterfully. He framed Germany as a victim, promised revenge, and painted himself as the only savior capable of restoring honor. By creating resentment and instability, the treaty weakened faith in democracy. People looked for strong leaders rather than compromise, paving the way for dictatorship. The Allies believed harsh punishment would prevent another war. Instead, they underestimated human anger, national pride, and political opportunism. The treaty created the very conditions it sought to avoid. The Treaty of Versailles unintentionally planted seeds of revenge. Humiliation, poverty, political chaos, and nationalism set Germany on a path toward extremism and war. A peace meant to last forever became the foundation for the deadliest conflict in history. The Treaty of Versailles left Germany humiliated, impoverished, and politically unstable. Its clauses created resentment, anger,
and a desperate search for answers. These conditions were the perfect fuel for radical ideology.
Millions of Germans felt betrayed and humiliated. The sense of injustice became a national obsession. Pride lost, hope shattered, anger turned into a collective wound. Reparations and economic collapse left citizens struggling to survive. Poverty and starvation became a breeding ground for movements promising solutions, revenge, and strength.
The Weimar Republic could not govern effectively. Political fragmentation and street violence made extremists seem like the only alternative. Democracy appeared weak. Adolf Hitler exploited this perfect storm. He promised revenge for Versailles, restoration of pride, and strength for a broken nation. Millions rallied to his vision of a new Germany.
The treaty became central to Nazi propaganda. Every failure of the Republic was blamed on the Allies, internal enemies, and the traitors who signed the treaty.
Once in power, Hitler rebuilt the military. Defying Versailles, Germany rearmed rapidly. This preparation was both revenge and ambition, an inevitable step toward conflict.
Germany began reclaiming lost territories. The world watched in alarm as Hitler annexed Austria and later the Sudetenland. Each act was framed as correcting Versailles' injustice.
The Allies, still haunted by the horrors of World War I, were slow to respond. Appeasement allowed Germany to grow stronger, further emboldening Hitler's ambitions.
Hitler transformed humiliation into national pride. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to weaken Germany, had instead united the nation behind a leader who promised to reverse every injustice.
Economic revival, military buildup, and territorial expansion set the stage for a global conflict. The chain was clear: humiliation, anger, extremism, militarization.
The Treaty of Versailles unintentionally ignited the path to World War II. Its consequences were profound: a wounded nation, extremist ideology, and a leader willing to exploit both. The world would pay the ultimate price for a treaty meant to secure peace.